the darkness has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you guys for being here today. Before we get started with our panel, and we're going to get into it really quickly, this year one of my initiatives was education as the new civil rights. And I am a mother of 4. Most of you guys know that by now. I have a 14-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 6, and a 4-year-old. So for me, education means a lot. My kids are in the public school system. And I do that because I pay my taxes to the public school system. And I demand the public that I pay my taxes to educate my children in the proper way. I don't look at the children that are sitting on either side of my children who may not have a mother and father in their home. I don't look at them as a problem. I look at them as an opportunity for me to do for them what somebody else did for me when my mother was off cleaning someone's home. So as I looked and started to research the things that the National Bar Association can do, our part in this civil rights movement, I thought this was an issue we could attack. There was a study released by the education department that said African American children are disciplined at a higher rate than any other set of kids. That through this thing called the school to prison pipeline, we are pushing out our future leaders into the streets, and we're not educating them. I never even included in my planning this issue called police brutality as a part of my initiative. But when the Eric Garner situation happened, a young man by the name of Darrell Washington came to me before the convention, and he said, President-elect means what happened in New York is not unusual. It is typical, and no one is addressing it. And he said, if black lawyers don't address this issue, then the law degrees, the paper on which our law degrees are written, aren't worth the paper is written on. I agree with him. We planned in 1 week a town hall meeting in our Atlanta convention. Thanks to that gentleman sitting over there, Terry Riley, stand up. I contacted Mr. Wiley. I said, would you be willing to give up your section meeting to hold a town hall so we can talk about this issue? I'm a corporate lawyer. I represent companies like Monsanto. I represent her company. We don't deal with police brutality. We deal with folks trying to get over on us, right? So I'm not what people would consider the typical face of this issue. But when I went to the town hall, Terry is a 23-year veteran prosecutor in Alameda County in California. He's a bad brother if you get to know him. Darrell Washington is a 28-year veteran plaintiff's attorney representing victim families. The two of them together, don't tell me we can't do something quickly. In the matter of less than a day, put together the National Bar Association 25 state initiative on police brutality. And they taught me that this problem is raping our community so much so that we have to study it. I said, what's the solution for the Justice Department to come in, one, and take over these police departments that don't understand they're our employees? So let's just call up Eric Holder. He said it don't work that way. President means. I said, what do you mean? Because you know how I am. I just pick up the phone, get it done. They said the Justice Department can't investigate those issues. They have to have the facts. And so one of the things we did is they researched and looked at the 25 states that had the highest rates of African Americans and highest incidents, because you know there's no database that deals with police brutality. But these are brothers that are practicing on opposite ends. They came up with 25 states. Missouri, y'all, was on our list before there was a Mike Brown. We were coming here before there was a Mike Brown. This was going to happen before there was a Mike Brown. But the creator saw it so that it had to happen a week after I was installed. And the plan immediately was pushed into action before I can do my crafting and nifting. And in that, we decided to send an open records request to 25 states and give us your information on police brutality. To date, we sued Ferguson to get records from them. Every state we have done, we're about to launch lawsuits in the remaining 11 who have not given us the information, because the goal is to put together a report, put some findings, make some recommendations to the Justice Department and say these are the locations that you should be going after. And if you don't, we'll be watching you. Part 2 is our Know Your Rights Because It Can Save Your Life campaign. We go around to these 25 states because I believe that if you're going to spotlight something, you ought to be willing to help solve the problem. And we go around to these 25 states and we go into the community and we talk about how brothers and sisters can stay alive. But we don't just talk about that. What angers me the most is that some of y'all are comfortable with the fact that in 2015, a brother or sister, or me even as a lawyer, cannot exercise my rights if I run into a police officer. I understand it's necessary to stay alive, but we ought to be frustrated that we have to do that to stay alive. Yeah. I went to Jackson, Mississippi, 51% African American, a black U.S. attorney, a black mayor, a black sheriff, and a black police chief. And when we were done teaching 200 black men their rights, the deputy sheriff got up and said, I disagree with everything the president of the National Bar Association said. I tell you what, if I pull you both on the side of the road, I don't need you litigating your rights to me. I need you to shut up and do what I tell you. It ain't a black-white issue, baby, it's a blue issue. And that's what we learned. But I ran into some educators that said, Pamela, let me tell you why your education initiative was so important. Because if educators are honest with themselves, they will really admit to you that mass incarceration and police brutality is a self-fulfilling prophecy of the school-to-prison pipeline. It's an issue we gotta deal with, y'all. And so education, we laid out an initiative this year, looking at the charter versus the public school issue. We looked at the issue of special needs and how we treat them in our educational system. But there was a brother that helped me design this program, Dr. Joseph Youngblood, who will be monitoring this be the moderator for this program. But I decided this year to do something a little different and get me advisors in areas. I drove to Kansas City, Missouri, because I wanted a congressperson with integrity on the side of the aisle that, you know, sometimes they calm me down. I had to tell him, I came to you in my St. John suit, but don't let this St. John fool you. This girl from East St. Louis, and her alter ego is named Wilhelmina. She don't come out. So I need somebody who's connected to the Creator that can say, Pamela, you may not want to say that right now. And I didn't have to interview with Congressman Cleaver, but he decided that he would be our legislative partner. And he kicked off our education initiative by turning over his panel at CBC. And I will tell you that we dealt with the issue of charter versus public school in a way that nobody else has dealt with it. And we looked at issues. And don't you know it was standing room only? But the reason I'm doing this, and I'm going to get out the way, is because one of the things I told my bar association at the beginning of the year is that we would do the Wiley Branton series different. We would travel around the country and deal with this education initiative in various areas. We went to New York, California, New Orleans, and Arkansas. They said, you're doing too much. I said, no, we haven't done enough. We ought to go into these communities and apologize that we've been some parasites, not social engineers. And we have to acknowledge that in order to get credibility. But I told them that to make sure the scholarship remained, that the University of Iowa, the University of Arkansas, had agreed to do a special edition of its law review journal on our educational initiative. And I promised them that at this mid-year conference, I would unveil that journal and I would distribute that journal. Now, my members are sometimes used to people making promises, but not keeping promises. But folk from East St. Louis, we don't make a promise that we can't keep. So today, I present to you the special edition of the University of Arkansas Law Review Journal. This is our edition of our education as the new civil rights, and it has been published. So we have documented it, so you understand that we don't have just folk who are lawyers, but we have scholars. And in this journal are articles that came from our symposium series, authors, and one of my jobs was to say, I wanted to display our own. And one of my individuals working with me said, but there are some brothers and sisters from other mothers who are doing excellent jobs and we ought to give them an opportunity. I said, no, sir. They got lots of opportunities. We need to be a little selfish sometimes when it comes to us. I want to give us an opportunity because it's hard for us to get published in order for professors to move up and become tenured. And that's what we wanted to accomplish. So I thank Tracy Porter, who is not here, and Dean Bellamy. They spearheaded this effort. But we have copies of this journal to distribute. We're not done. At the convention, we will be unveiling a special edition of St. John's Law Review Journal on our Voting Right Initiative. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I was supposed to introduce Dr. Youngwood.
After the introduction, we're done.
I got excited.
She gets going with the vision, and we can't stop. But I want to welcome you all here this morning for what we think is going to be a phenomenal dialogue about the legacy, the history of Charles Hamilton Houston, the phenomenal legal strategist. You know, when we think about the people of his era, particularly the legal strategists behind the civil rights movement, I don't think we have an earthly idea of the magnitude of what happened when they sat to tables and at tables like this one, to have the dialogue around what legal strategies we needed to deploy to deal with the issues that were impacting African Americans in the United States of America. And it's in that spirit that we're here today. It was really interesting. I had a sidebar ex parte conversation with someone yesterday who said, wow, I was looking at the agenda and that's a 3-hour panel discussion. How is that going to work? 3 hours, 9 very experienced and articulate people, but how do you manage that? And are people going to be engaged? And I said, well, if you took a look at the people that we have on this panel, then the 2 hours that you sat through to watch Cookie and Lucius Lyon, in comparison to the reality, not only of what these brothers and sisters are going to talk about, but the reality of how it's going to translate and be applicable to the change that we need to deal with these issues in this ahistoric moment in the history of the plight of African Americans in this country. So it's in that spirit that we decided to really create a conceptual design that is framed to allow us to deal with the broader issue of the history of the civil rights movement. And we have, as it says on the program, 2 seasoned veterans who are going to give us that element of the historical context, exploring and looking at what has happened, where were we, what are the lessons learned from the civil rights movement, how does that translate into what we need to be thinking about now in terms of next level strategy, and then more importantly, how do we identify what the current modern day challenges are and the ways that we need to mobilize to be able to address that. After we have that piece, what we wanted to focus on was the fact that every war has to have frontline soldiers. And at the end of the day, every movement in the history of mankind that I can think about, and we can talk about Soweto, we can talk about the U.S. Civil Rights Movement in terms of the role that SNCC played. We can even talk about Tiananmen Square. Youth are synonymous with movements for a multiplicity of reasons. I'll give you one little anecdote. My 9-year-old son and I were planning to go to the Philadelphia die-in protest. And he said, well, Dad, what time is the protest? And so I said, well, why does that matter? He said, well, you know, after 9 o'clock, you're not good for much. So then we need to think about whatever. But I use that in jest. But when we talk about the sacrifices that these youth are making because they are taking a stand that I might not be positioned to take because of who I am, where I am, and what my responsibilities are, we wanted to make sure that we were not only acknowledging but celebrating the role that these youth have played in taking a stand against this injustice that's happening to youth all around the country. That's a critical piece, but more importantly, we wanted their voices to be heard, and that's also why symbolically they are elevated at the table, because it's time that we embrace them in ways that are critical to the advancement of this movement. And then we're going to close out with three experts who are going to give us some applied and pragmatic approaches and strategies to think about when we look at this multiple, this multi-tiered battle that we're dealing with. So we have experts who are going to talk about the educational piece, since that's at the epicenter of President Lewis's initiative on the school prison pipeline. We have someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office who's going to talk about the legal strategies that we need to deploy, again, to make sure that these instances and issues are documented, but that also there is a coherent legal strategy to be able to deal with them and address them. And then we have a young brother who is an organizer extraordinaire, who's really going to talk about what it means in this era to mobilize people around these kinds of initiatives. And again, we know that that kind of solidarity is the critical piece that we need, irrespective of who you are, where you are, what you think you are. We are all vulnerable and susceptible to everything that is happening right now. That at the end of the day, just as my pastor would always say, there's no respect of persons at the cross. But when you're pulled over by that police officer, there's no respect of persons there either. And at the end of the day, it doesn't say Dr. Youngblood on my driver's license, it just says Joe. So how we deal with and manage that becomes a critical part of how we're going to move forward. So I wanted to give us a brief framing for the conversation this morning. And one of the quotes that has always been very powerful to me is one by the great abolitionist and scholar and orator, Frederick Douglass. And actually, I'm not even going to call it a quote, because one of the things that I learned as a developmental psychologist is that context matters. And we're going to see that in a minute before we pass the microphone over to our great congressman. And that quote is, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Now, how often do we hear that? Quite a bit, right? But how often do you hear the other things that follow it in what was a much larger thesis and speech given by Frederick Douglass in 1857 about the strategic emancipation of Africans in the West Indies? The rest of the paragraph says this: if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without the thunder and lightning that accompanies it. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one. Yeah. And it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. For power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out exactly the measure of injustice and wrong in which they will be imposed upon. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or both. Context matters. So the difference between that standalone quote, which is powerful in and of itself, is like the difference between my grandma's pound cake with the cream cheese and sour cream and real sticks of butter or without. It's the sustenance, it's the flavor, it's the seasoning that becomes the critical part of how we look at this movement and what it represents for us moving forward. So with that said, I want to take another liberty to, we have bios for all of our panelists, so I won't delay us any further by going into that. But I did want to say a few words about the people who are going to speak on our first panel. President Means talked about what Congressman Cleaver represents to the movement. What he has represented for us in Congress has been critical. His history as a public servant, I think, goes back to his days on the city council in Kansas City, and then translated into the first mayor of Missouri's, I think, largest city, Kansas City. And again, a change agent who understood what it meant to be black, what his identity represented, and how that translated as a public servant in creating change for other people. We have to make sure that we celebrate and support these people who are our representatives and our delegates. They need to be able to stand up in Congress and say that they lead people and then look behind them and actually see people. So we have to make sure that we're positioned to support them and to make sure that they are part of the fabric of what we do in the context of these change processes that we're going to be talking about today. As an anecdote, because I wanted to share something that people may not know about the congressman, I am close friends and policy advisor to the first African-American female congressman from the state of New Jersey. And I called her yesterday and I said, Congresswoman Watson Coleman, I'm going to be moderating the panel with your colleague, Congressman Cleaver, and anything you can say about him that, would just sort of give me something that would, maybe add a personal touch. And she said, well, all I will say is, there's something about a name. And she said, I don't know if you speak Hebrew, but Emmanuel translates into God is with us. And she said, everywhere that brother goes, everything he does and stands for, God is with him. It shows, it exalts his servant perspective, and it is an honor to call him my big brother in Congress. So I'll transfer that to you from the second seasoned scholar and brother on our panel that I will talk about is Brother Dr. Professor Cornel West, who really needs no introduction. But what I will say is that every time I have the opportunity to spend time with him when he is out in the battlefield and in the vineyard ministering, and I don't know if that's how you refer to it, but that's what I see it as. It goes beyond public intellectual because he's a man of the people. And we had an opportunity to go out yesterday into the community. We were interacting with people at the wonderful soul food restaurant here, Sweetie Pie's. He was the sweetie pie of sweetie pie. Because at the end of the day, everybody from the workers in the back to the servers to the owner of the restaurant recognized who he was on site. And to see his engagement with the people, let me tell you, it is authentic. And at the end of the day, when we look at this segment of public intellectuals that we have out there, some of whom are not public, they're not accessible, and some of them not even intellectual. But at the end of the day, this brother is all of that and more. And again, what he represents for us as an authentic leader, somebody who is of the people, by the people, and for the people, is just a critical part of who he is. So in addition to everything that you have in the bio, I also wanted to share that. So with that said, I'm going to pass the mantle over to Congressman Cleaver, who is going to kick us off. And again, it's about the history of civil rights in America, where we are, what we've been, and the lessons that we've learned.
Thank you, Dr. Youngblood.
That's the press mic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very generous introduction. And you have a fabulous president. It's a pleasure to be here. I think when we talk about the civil rights movement, I think there are some misconceptions, but some we are clear. And that is, I think we've had a civil rights movement since leaving West Africa. I think there is some, magnolia myth that, African Americans were brought over here in the Middle Voyage, and we sat happily playing the banjo under the magnolia tree. That did not happen, and we need to erase it as quickly as we can. There has been a struggle for freedom since the beginning. The reality is that we may have had a much greater opportunity for the launch of what most people see as the contemporary civil rights movement back in the 1950s. Primarily when 5 ministers assembled first in New Orleans and then in Atlanta, and then Montgomery, they first formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, which became the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in every other place except Montgomery. Even today, it's still called the Montgomery Improvement Association, which Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, Fred Shuttlesworth, C.K. Steele, and Joe Lowry formed this group and launched an effort. But there were other leaders, and I said with the news media at times when they said Dr. Martin Luther King was the leader of the Civil Rights Movement. He was the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
That's right.
And there were leaders in NAACP, leaders in Urban League, and my family. I chose another path. I have one cousin who was Minister of Communications for the Black Panther Party, Eldridge Cleaver, who eventually went crazy and joined Jerry Falwell's church and did a lot of other things. I mean, he's a good person. Like saying DNA, we saw things differently at the end. I think that's another issue. And then I have another cousin, Pete O'Neill, who a book was just written called The Last Panther. He is the only exiled Black Panther in the world right now. He is in Arusha, Tanzania. They chose one route. I went to seminary, chose another. And the reason I mention that is I am convinced that the Panthers and the Deacons and SNCC all were part of helping Dr. King become successful.
That's right.
And so I think we made a lot of progress early on, and I think we ought to acknowledge that we made some progress, a lot of progress. I never would have been elected mayor of Kansas City in 1991 in a city that was 25% African American, but for some progress, some movement. And then 2 years later, Freeman Bosley was elected here in St. Louis. And at that time, and never since, this is the only time, the 2 largest cities in the state were headed by African American mayors. And so I think there's testimony that we had success. Now, the other thing that I want you to understand, the Civil Rights Movement was not launched to improve race relations.
That's right.
It was a justice movement, and the hope was that as we pursued justice, then that might improve race relations. It was changing conduct that the early movement was designed to do, changing conduct, not necessarily attitudes. I mean, Bull Connor wasn't going to change his attitudes.
That's right.
And so you want to change Bull Connor's conduct. And then hopefully after that happens, then you begin to improve interracial relations. Now, I want to fast forward because I got 2 minutes left. Self-imposed 2 minutes. It's important to know that as we have made this progress, one of the things that has been missing has been the Deacons and the Black Panthers, which makes it infinitely more difficult for the Congressional Black Caucus to function, because I'm always amazed when people will say, everybody I know would, with a few exceptions, worked the March on Washington. Which, so it's like 50 million people were there. You meet somebody, oh yeah. And so it's like everybody voted for me. Everybody actually, I'm with you for from the beginning, Reverend. But here's the thing that I think is important. People say, well, I went to jail with Andrew Young down in Marion. Well, Martin Luther King wouldn't let Andy go to jail. He had to have somebody out negotiating and dealing with the folk. And that was Andy's role. Now, Hosea Williams went to jail every Thursday. but Andy wouldn't do that. You gotta have, that's why I respect the young folk.
Yes.
For Ferguson. You gotta have the pressure applied. Now, you know, we cannot allow people to declare we are in a post-racial America, because it ain't so. And because we still must continue to struggle. But we've got to have people coming in to the struggle from every realm. There's no one sector that should be in the struggle, because it makes it a lot easier when people, you know, are concerned that we can get things that if we have just one single track, that they can get over on us. You know, you want to stop Hosea Williams from tearing up Birmingham, Alabama? You listen to Martin Luther King. And that's the way things happen. We have attorneys, probably a name nobody here knows, Chauncey X, who was Dr. King's attorney from Chicago. He also, the most famous case he did was, well, actually he defended Martin Luther King, who was indicted for, I think, $130 some income tax evasion. I don't know if that is in your new book or not, but and Chauncey Estridge actually defended him. He also defended in the Martin Luther King before the Supreme Court and won. Now he's a name most people don't know. The point is we need attorneys involved, and Fred Gray was inextricable to the progress in Montgomery, Alabama. So. There's a role for everybody in the civil rights movement. Let me conclude. You know, it is that darkness that the stars come out. And what we've had was the darkness of Ferguson brought out some stars. You hush yourself, please. And so I think that's the route we have to go. We need them, we need attorneys, we need legislators, we need people who are committed to the struggle, and not just to be on the evening news.
That's right.
I just want to say that I am so blessed to be here.
Yes.
To have a courageous, visionary leader as my dear sister Pamela means. When she calls, I come running. I had to cancel some things and work it out with my precious daughter. But I've had to do that when there's persons of integrity and high quality call. You are willing to serve. This is very, very, very important. And true, Brother William means I got a sister and a brother for life. He's high quality.
Yes, he
Time to
is.
spend. Oh, I'm telling you,
Yes, he is.
I can testify to that. Down in young blood, my dear brother, Roll Burrell. Yeah, Douglas Burrell. That's what it is. Did we have a day yesterday? Not just that, what was the sweet pizza? What name of that restaurant? Sweetie Pie. Sweet Pie, yeah, we had a good time. Oh, yes, we did. But I say that because, you see, I am who I am because somebody loved me. Somebody cared for me. Somebody attended to me. No matter what I do in my life, I will never have a higher title than being the second son of Irene and Clifton. Being the brother of Cynthia, who was my dear sister, distinguished judge, Judy Preddy Draper's childhood friend. And my pastor, Reverend Willie P. Cook, you see, Shiloh Baptist Church, he loved us in such a way that there's no way I can really get to the crack house if I wanted to. And I start on that note, because the reason why the Black freedom struggle is the greatest tradition in the modern world is because there's been no people who have been hated so and still dished out so much love. There's been no people who've been dishonored, devalued so, degraded so, and still tried to pursue justice. And this is true. Why? Not because black people have any monopoly on truth or goodness or anything. It was because we decided to answer Du Bois's 4 question. How shall integrity face oppression? And when we talk about black people, it could be Donny Hathaway in St. Louis. It could be Josephine Baker in St. Louis. It could be Martin King. It could be your grandmother or grandfather. They were persons of integrity against the grain, no matter what the consequences were. And we need to put that at the center. The second question of Du Bois, how shall honesty face deception? Now, white supremacy, one of the most vicious lies of modern times, is still alive, and it's a deception. And the question is, who wants to be honest and tell the truth about it? And the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. And for those of us who fell in love with a Palestinian Jew named Jesus, it's the least of these, those in the prisons, those locked in the decrepit school systems with soul murder being enacted every day, told that they don't have the capacity to do X or Y, those dealing with massive unemployment and underemployment, those have to deal with indecent housing. They are as much children of God as anybody on the east side of New York City. That's a fundamental commitment. Integrity, honesty. And the third question, what does decency do in the face of insult? There's been no people who've been insulted, assaulted, attacked, but we decided not, after 400 years of being terrorized and traumatized and stigmatized, to create a black Al-Qaeda. We decided not to create a black ISIS. We know they're gangsters. We've been gangsterized. We're still being gangsterized this very moment, especially our young people. But what did we do? We said that in the name of integrity, in the name of honesty, in the name of decency, most importantly, in the name of love. See, when the Isley Brothers called the Black Freedom Movement a caravan of love, that's just not a song. That's just not entertainment. That's coming from your heart and your soul of a people who could have chosen to terrorize folk long time ago and decided not to do it because it's not right. It's because it's wrong. It's unjust. It's unjust. Oh no, listen to me. Because this is consecrated space when you're talking about black freedom. We've never excluded white brothers and sisters in red and yellow and others, but we got too many folk in love with everybody but black people. We're starting that home on the country side of town. We just don't stop there. The last question, Du Bois. Now, Du Bois raised this question in 1956. He's 89 years old. He's under house arrest. He's living in Brooklyn. He's only got one friend, Paul Robeson, also living in house arrest in Philadelphia. He said, I want to pass on some love letters to the younger generation so they won't forget about those who love so and sacrifice so, not because they have a monopoly on purity. Du Bois was a human being like everybody else. Martin was too. I am. Brother Cleveland here. Fannie Lou Hamer was. What? Come on. Curtis Mayfield, that's something else. We start talking about Mary Lou Williams, John Coltrane, and Curtis Mayfield. They quasi-angelic, you know what I mean? Let's just be honest about it. But for the rest of us, integrity, honesty, decency, and the last question is, how does virtue meet brute force? Because our struggle has always been one in which the police have been on us. Starting with the slave patrol. Anytime you raise the issue of the humanity of black people, you got to be willing to die. They will kill you. They will murder you. And we all got stories. Some of us wonder why we're still Christian. Prayer avails much. In the context of struggle, when they coming at you with everything, and all you got is just unarmed truth and unconditional love, and they got cannons. And they got a media that can lie on you. And what we need to do is pass on to our young folks. We want y'all to know nothing wrong with black rage, but you got to channel it through love and justice rather than hatred and revenge. That's your history. Be courageous, tell the truth, be critical of we all the folk.
Say that, say that.
Louis Armstrong never understood Charlie Parker, but there's no jazz without both of them. Aretha may not understand Beyonce. Beyonce is the greatest entertainer of her day, but she ain't no Aretha. Look at this organization, founded by 5 magnificent people. One was named Charles. Well, no, we talk about this organization. Charles Hamilton, the giant in his own way. We talk about old Charles Edwards, George Henry Woodson, the sister named Gertrude Rush. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Edwards sided with Paul Robeson. He was disbarred in 1951. One of the founders of this organization. He used to say in the newspaper, the Iowa Bystander, which was the leading black newspaper. He said, I'd rather die and go to hell than to tell my children I'm not going to fight for them for their dignity. That's 1920. Oh, we got something to learn from those who came before. We're not creating the wheel. They've already consecrated the soil. The problem is we don't have enough seeds sprouting because too much cowardliness and complicity gets in the way. We become so morally constipated. We have a sense of what right, but we're too scared to let the good flow. Too many consequences. You got to take too big of a risk. I'd rather be comfortable and well-adjusted to injustice and well-adapted to indifferent than be true to Gertrude Rush and Charles Edwards and George Henry Woodson. They had to sacrifice. We need that spirit for our young people. I'm going to bring this to a close. Because the war that has been going on, especially against our young folk,
That's right.
I've been trying to convince them, first and foremost, it's not even solely economic, political, and social. It begins on the spiritual level.
Yes.
How do you convince young people not to have confidence in themselves and love themselves and feel that they can straighten their backs up and organize and mobilize? I ask young folk all the time, because I've been blessed to teach in prison for 37 years. Just finished my class at Broadway, 150 brothers, reading philosophy. And I said, now that we got a Ferguson moment, what a wonderful thing. What's your soundtrack gonna sound like? Because the attack on young people is an attack on their souls as well as their employment and education. That's why we don't have young people's groups like the Delphonics and the Dramatics and the Enchantment and the Marvelettes and the Emotions and the Jonesboro. Because those are courageous voices being raised that interweave and organize and mobilize sound on a stage that touch souls. And now the thin music of young people is just stimulate bodies, titillate bodies, orgiastic foreplay, no story, no drama, no narrative, no group, no group. Other boys and men is gone. It's gone. Why? Because you got the oligarchs and the plutocrats in the recording and radio industry. They don't want young people to sing the way David Ruffin sang against Otis Williams and sang against Eddie Kendrick from Birmingham. Where's the band? The Roots is the last band. So what you gonna fall back on to deal with white supremacy, to deal with catastrophe? You're gonna need some spirit to deal with that.
Yes.
You need some soul stirring like Johnny Taylor and Lou Rawls and Sam Cooke. The body stimulation ain't gonna do it. And our young folk are hungry for that. But they wonder how to gain access to it. Because they can't gain access to it too well in the schools. And they used to get it in our churches.
They talk about it.
Churches so marketized, you got mega churches, not enough mega love. Not enough mega churches. Commodify. Making money. Cream, cash rule everything. Brown Lee Wu-Tang Clan, man. They telling the truth. So the question becomes on a spiritual tip. Young people, you know that we love you in the same way the older folk loved us. That's right. The only reason why we stand is because the older folk loved us and cared for us. If we want to let the young folk know that's what we do for them, that's what's so magnificent about the leadership of my dear sister Pamela. She wants the young folk to know I'm part of the love train that people get ready. Curtis Mayfield was saying about, don't need no ticket, just get on the love train. But you better get your courage together. You better get your integrity, your honesty, your decency, your virtue together. Get on the train. Get DNA on the train again. We get back on the train again.
Brother West, the love and emancipation train has left New York, went down to D.C., picked up the congressman, brought him to Kansas City, brought him on over to St. Louis, and now we're headed to Ferguson. I wanted to start out this morning with some kind of quote as we shifted to each of these multiple panel foci. And so for this one, Brother West, you just set me up for it because as an academic, I hate to give a quote and can't give attribution, so I don't know who said it, but it is extraordinarily applicable and apropos here. And when we talk about the introduction of these soldiers who are here, this quote said that a true soldier fights battles, not because he or she hates who or what is in front of them, but because of the love they have for the people who are better. So, the element of the critical transition of this conversation to these brothers and sisters who in love have sacrificed their time, sacrificed their resources, sacrificed their blood, even sacrificed elements of their identity and their futures, because many of them have been incarcerated, many of them have been eviscerated, and at the end of the day, what they do is because of who they love and what this struggle represents for them and also for us. So with that, let me say that the next voices that we'll hear from will be Bishop Derek Robinson, who will provide his context for the role in Ferguson and what's happening. We will hear from Sister Anita Mack, Sister Yana Delane, and Brother Carlos Ball.
Good morning. We honor this distinguished leader, attorney, Ms. President, Pamela Means. Let's just give it up for you. I would be remiss to say that she has took on a major role for Ferguson, and we definitely appreciate you. There's so many people who have reached out but forgot about the community in which they're from. And Attorney Means, she said, no, I'm gonna reach back and get my people. So that deserves. I want to say first, I decided I tell you my experience. That day, there was a play going on in our city called The Wizard of Oz. And there was a big play going on, and one of my members was actually in that play. Well, one of my members lived in Canfield, and she called me on the phone while I was headed to, many of you all know where Florissant at, that's where it was. She said, but another member called, she said, you need to get to Canfield. And mind you, I'd never heard of Canfield before. I said, because I didn't know where she lived, but she was like, it's outside of my home. An individual just had been killed by the police. Well, mind you, in this city, of course, Carlos Ball could tell you, his brother was killed by the police. So many people has been killed by the police in the city, and everybody never, ran into it. So I said, well, okay, I didn't really. And then she said, but he's been out here for about 15, 20 minutes. I said, he's still out 20 minutes? That's a long time, in my mind. So I said, well, let me do a few things, and I'll be over there. That was around 12-ish hour, and I got there about 2-ish. He still was laying in the street. That was 2 hours later when I got there, and I saw his mom crying and hollering, saying, "Can I see my baby?" But I saw dogs being able to go sniff her baby's body, and she wasn't able to get not even 100 feet of her baby. And my heart began to go out in such disbelief that a mother had to sit there and see her son not even put a sheet over his body after 2 hours. Didn't even have the decency to cover him up. And I had to sit there and see that mama boo-hoo and cry. I've never seen that in my life. Saw children, Sierra's son, who's 5 years old, sitting there and said, why would they just do that and leave him out there? After the 4th hour, I saw they pull up an SUV truck and not even have the decency to pick him up by head and feet, drug the bottom part of his body and put him in an SUV. Not even give him medical attention in the city which we live and pay taxes. I said, you wonder why we fight and we, as African Americans, over and over again, our lives seem so senseless in the community which we live. And I saw young people saying, we have nothing to live for. I saw young people saying, what's the reason? I was a very conservative pastor, but after I got down and saw the young people, I said, you know what? I'm gonna be the hood pastor. I lost a lot of comrades because of my stand. I had to see young people cry on my shoulders, grown men, saying, listen, this is what I have to go through. My experience after that, we were headed to a prayer visual. We were marching from Canfield to West Florissant. And as we were marching with the mother, Leslie, and her husband, son's father, Michael Brown, Sr., the police began to antagonize us before we ever got to West Florissant. This was on a Sunday. And while we were marching, the police, there was about 20 of them, immediately threatened to arrest us. And the young people already very tense, angry. You just had a young man in our community laying on the ground. Don't try to come and tell us we can't march for our rights. So it began, the young people just got angry and things just went chaotic. But I want to say this, and I may, y'all may disagree, but Martin Luther King said something. The riot is the cry of the unheard. That's right. So I've never knocked the people from rioting because they was heard. If they had never did it, nobody else would have ever put their eyes on Ferguson.
That's right.
I had to cry and tell young people how being black was not a crime. I told them I'm black and I'm proud. And I'll say it out loud every time. But one of the things on that Monday, I was out in front of Quick Trip exercising my First Amendment. And immediately we saw tanks pull up. It was a very peaceful day. It was at about 6 in the afternoon. The lights were still up. There hadn't even been sunbreak. And immediately we heard a dispersal order. And all we asked, several of our senators, Jamila Nasheed and Maria, was standing there, and they said, why we have to move? And they said, if you don't move, we're going to tear gas you. And immediately, they began within seconds, didn't even give us enough chance to run, began to start tear gassing us, began to start throwing canisters. And there's a road that I parked on which was behind Quick Trip. and we were supposed to leave. We had no other way to get out. They blocked the streets, and we could not go. And they began to point guns and told us if we did not turn around at a street that had no outlet, that they was going to tear gas us from our cars. They began to start throwing canisters at our cars, which then you're going to smell it. And in most of you can't breathe in it. Well, all of us. And so it was so to the point that we had to call 911. 911 tells us we can't do anything for you, and hang up in our ears. There's families, there's an older lady that was 89 years old, she's been living in Ferguson all of her life. And she literally died because of the tear gas. That's what's happening in our community. One of the things I want to say, I honor our forefathers. But I think I can appreciate our young people saying, we ain't gonna wait on the church this time. It took about 48 hours for the church at St. Louis to even come up with a response in the city which we live.
It's true. Tell the truth.
Some of the pastors, and I talked from them, told me, why are you even out there? You should be praying in your front yard. But I have a son who's 8 years old, who came home a couple years ago crying. I understand why my child was crying. My child was boo-hooing. And he cried, Mama Beverly, for a long time, all the way from home, from school, 20 minutes. And I asked him, I said, son, why are you crying? He said to me, because my white friend mother came to the school and said never to talk to a black man. Her son was only 8 years old. And my son, I had to sit and explain to him that racism still exists in this city. Every public school is non-accredited in our city. That's why we fight. Our children cannot even get a quality education. And you wonder why our city has always been in an uproar. And so we honor our young people because they fought for what they believe to be justice.
Okay, I'm gonna archive this. I'll be right back.